the way that it ejects the ammunition is pretty unusual. Hi, my name is Jim and I'm a gunsmith here in Maine. Welcome to another episode of This Old Gun. Now today's old gun is a little bit unusual. It's kind of a rarity. This is a Merwin Hulbert in .38 Merwin Hulbert caliber. This is one of their model number ones. They started production in about 1878, and it's a spur trigger .38, and they called it an automatic. The reason it's called an automatic is the way that it ejects. Now it does load through the side like a Colt, but these things, they'd only made a few thousand of them before they started replacing them with the double action model in about 1880. So from about 1878 to 1880, these guns were produced. The really unusual thing is, there was a company named Merwin Hulbert that owned part of Hopkins and Allen, and if you were looking at my earlier video, and they were talking about, they also owned the part of the Evans Rifle Company. So let's go ahead and get started in this. The very earliest models didn't have a shield that had this sliding gate. This came into late production. Okay, so what I do is I load 38 Smith & Wesson brass, because 38 Smith & Wesson and 38 Merwin Hulbert were pretty close to the same. Now, with all the Merwin Hulberts, you always want to use black powder loads instead of smokeless. The reason being is because you look how thin that cylinder material is. Okay, now the reason they were called an automatic, let's go ahead and get these two loaded in. We're only going to fire 2 rounds for the sake of brevity, for time. You can slide that little up right there, and then it's single action trigger spur. So you'd cock it to fire it single action for every shot. But here's the neat thing. Whenever you fired the ammunition and you didn't fire all of it, to do the extraction, your little shield here has a hook built in the back to catch on the rims. So this little piece right here on the bottom, you'd push it up with your thumb, you'd tilt the barrel 90 degrees and pull it out. You notice the live ammunition is long enough to stay in the gun. All the empties would be ejected and fall out. So let's go ahead and fire this. Now, I just fired 1 round, right? Watch how this works. There's 1 live round and 1 expended round in the cylinder here. So your live round stays in, the expended round comes out. So right there, and we'll just close it up. We'll fire the other one. And as before, whoop, like I said, you see how to eject it. Now here's the neat thing about these pistols. Okay, Hopkins and Allen, which was the manufacturer of these Merwin Hulbert revolvers, they went out of business. Merwin Hulbert went out of business probably about 1880, I think, or a little later. Reason being is because Merwin Hulbert were the distributors for this revolver, even though Hopkins and Allen's manufactured it. But they were also tied to the Evans Rifle Company here in Maine. Well, what put the company out of business? The Russian Imperial military wanted to buy a large shipment of these, so 3 containers of these larger 44 caliber pistols were sent to Russia. By the same token, the Russians came here to Maine and bought a bunch of the Evans repeaters for their military. The Tsar of Russia decided to renege on the deal, keep the guns and not pay for them. Merwin Hulbert tried for 3 years to get payment for all those guns and ended up losing their butt. And they went out of business. Nobody knows exactly how many of these guns exist, because in 1891, there was a fire at the factory that destroyed all the Merwin Hulbert paperwork. Later on in 1900, the company, Hopkins and Allen, had another fire that destroyed the rest of the factory. Now, this gun here is in blue. The largest majority of these Merwin Hulbert revolvers ended up being nickel plated. The reason being is because nickel plating in those days were more resistant to the corrosion of black powder cartridges, and the blue were not. The reason the blue guns never caught on that great because the Hopkins Allen factory, when they were making the Merwin Hulbert revolvers, were able to produce nickel-plated guns for pretty cheap compared to all the other gun companies. So they sold the blue guns and the nickel-plated guns for the exact same price. And it's estimated that only 5% of total production ended up actually being blued. Now, when I got this revolver, I went through it with a fine-tooth comb, pulled all the stuff out of the inside, and cleaned it up and looked at it very carefully. There was not any flaking of nickel plating anywhere on it. So this gun actually left the factory blued. Unfortunately, even though I got the serial number, I'm not able to look up anything in the records because the records no longer exist. But this was the fourth most popular firearm at the time period from the 1870s to 1880s. They caught on really well with the New York City Police Department and other places back east. They kind of struggled in the market out west between the Smith & Wessons, the Colts, and the Remingtons. So they were number 4 right behind that. But there were a few famous people that actually used these, outlaws and lawmen alike. And as always, you definitely, before you fire any of these old antique guns, you want to have them checked by a competent gunsmith, make sure that they're sound and they're capable of being fired. And as I'd mentioned before, don't shoot smokeless in any Merwin Hulbert revolver, for the simple fact that the metallurgy was kind of questionable even back then. The pressure curve on smokeless is not designed for something like this. Plus, you don't want to destroy an otherwise valuable gun. And as always, if you like this content, subscribe to the new channel, and I'll bring you some more content.